lazy, narcissistic, uncommitted, entitled, needy. Odds are, if I pointed you out, you didn't like the way it felt being singled out like that. Well, unfortunately, that's the way the millennial generation gets singled out every single day. A quick Google search and you'll find there's 16 different million articles about how millennials can either be manipulated into buying whatever it is you want to sell or criticizing them and blaming them for what's wrong with our society. My favorite article so far is by Newser, and the headline read, "Millennials, too lazy to eat cereal." Blaming the millennial generation for not eating cereal because bowls don't clean themselves. You know, it's funny because you can tell there's a lot of generational conflict that happens, and generational conflict is very ripe. It's ripe with all different reasons why, and we're going to get some background before we get into this. So there's three main generations that are currently in the workplace today, and that's the boomer. Anyone here fall in this category? A few, okay. Generation X, anyone? All right, it's good to know where you stand. And then the dreaded millennials. There we go, yes, be proud. So whenever a manager or a CEO calls me in and wants to talk about his generational problem that he's having in his workplace, I tell him about the differences in the generations by telling him what they all have in common when it comes to workplace characteristics, and that's loyalty. Now, of course, they all view loyalty completely differently. For the boomer, well, they're loyal to the company. That's because when they graduated high school or college, well, soon after that, they bought a house, got married, had kids, had financial obligations. And they were reliant on that company to provide them with an income to take care of those obligations. For a Gen Xer, they're loyal to self. Doesn't make them selfish, but what it does do is that means that they really value that work-to-live mentality. I do a job for you so you give me money so I can do what I really want to do. Gen Xers are very skeptical. That's because they're the first generation that saw politicians lie on TV. Well, get caught lying on TV. They saw their parents lose their jobs in the 80s. And they're the first generation that had both mom and dad leave the home together to go to a job, leaving them alone at home by themselves as independent kids, the original latchkey kids. Millennials, well, they're loyal to the community. And what that means is they want to innovate and inspire. They want to do work that makes a difference to the masses. Unlike their Gen X counterparts when their parents got laid off in the recent recession, millennials remained hopeful. Pew Research said that the millennial generation remains optimistic about their future, even in the face of some pretty daunting economical data. This is the generation of multitaskers and helicopter parents. They were born with gadgets in their hand while they go off into the world, and after Columbine, the world wasn't safe any longer. So parents became very protective. And it was very thought-out schedules and planned events, and everything was planned out for them. I often refer to them as the syllabus generation. They've always had a roadmap to success, both at home and at school. But because of hard times, bad decisions, or both, for the first time, all three of these generations are crossing paths in large numbers in the workplace. So you can see there's definitely a lot of generational conflict, and that's because boomers can't retire yet. One, they're living longer, and they can't afford retirement. AARP said that 44% of boomers are nowhere near ready for retirement. So this problem is not going to go away anytime soon, and it's important to think about the next question, which is how do you engage those people who think differently than you do? Well, you engage the others in 4 steps. Be real, be empowering, be connected, and be open. Let's break that down a little bit. So for a boomer, being real means face-to-face interaction, person to person. Forbes had an article called The Rise of the Boomer, in which they said that a boomer will have a phone conversation if necessary, but they prefer that hand-to-hand, eye-to-eye, sit-down chat. That's being real to them. For the Gen Xer, it's all about clear, concise communication. Don't have a 30-minute meeting when a 5-minute meeting will do the trick. Don't send me a 4-page memo when a paragraph does the exact same thing. That takes away from what I really want to do. And then you have, for the millennials, being real means being honest. You can't be fake or be phony or pretend with the millennial. They'll see right through you. And once they see that, that impression that they get won't fade for a long period of time. It totally changes everything for them. It changes the dialogue, and they say things like, I can't trust you anymore, because unlike the boomer, they're not loyal to the company. And unlike the Gen Xer, they weren't already skeptical of you in the first place. So the dialogue goes, I can't trust you, I don't like you, I can't work for you, and they will leave. To be empowering for a boomer means advancement and accolades. Now, obviously, there's some room for creativity here with advancement. During the recent recession, several boomers got what we call title raises. Anyone familiar with title raises? Okay, good. If you're not, what that means is that your job and your pay stays exactly the same. Great. But your title goes up. So if you were a manager, well, now you're a senior manager. Congratulations. If you were a vice president, don't worry, now you're a senior vice president, and that is phenomenal, top notch. Tell your kids. And that worked for a lot of boomers. As a matter of fact, one tech company that I worked with, they had a boomer who worked as a receptionist, and she was phenomenal, knew all the ins and outs, knew everything about that company, and really deserved a raise, but the company was strapped and couldn't afford to do it. And so they were a little bit creative, and they came up with changing her title to Vice President of First Impressions. Yeah, sounds super fancy. And it worked. She loved it. But when she did retire later on, they brought in a Gen Xer to take her place, and she couldn't care less what you called her. Because for a Gen Xer, they're empowered through compensation. Now, money talks, obviously. But again, there's wiggle room for creativity. So in times of recession, you can do things like say, hey, you know what, I know you worked really hard Monday through Thursday on this project. Put in the extra time, and I'm so appreciative of you. How about on Friday you work from home? There's compensation there. They get to sleep in, they get to not sit through traffic, and they still get the job done. It gives them that family time. Or when it comes time for an annual raise, you can say, hey, you know what, we don't have money to give you that 3 or 4% average raise. How about we give you another week of vacation? There's that compensation that you can work with them. For the millennial, you empower them by making them a part of the team. They want to be a part of something. Don't forget, this is a generation that grew up being told they're special, that they're the smartest, the brightest, they can run the fastest. They're the best possible candidate by their parents, by their teachers, and by their coaches. So whenever possible, if you can make it as have them be a part of the decision, you'll find that you'll have a millennial that works 10 times harder than you ever thought imaginable, because it's not your idea, it's our idea. It's not your concept, it's our concept. And they care now about whether or not that concept fails or succeeds. Then you have be connected. And for a boomer, being connected is happy hours, it's weekend retreats, it's getaways, it's those group activities where you get to get out of the office and let your hair down. And that's what boomers love. For Gen Xers, it's almost the exact opposite. They try to put the kibosh on the happy hour. They want to do away with the weekend retreat. They find respect through independence. So for a Gen Xer, you say, hey, you know what? I trust you to get the job done, and I'm going to allow you to do that job. Give them a task, and you can't micromanage a Gen Xer. It just doesn't work. For a millennial, you show them you're connected by giving them a mentor. You got to find someone who understands them and can be a part of that. It's always kind of funny to say stories or jokes like, well, back in my day, that's not how we used to do it. Or, you kids with your newfangled gadgets. But you'll find that that doesn't engage your millennial employee. It actually alienates them. It makes them feel they're part of an organization that either is unwilling or unable to change to current statistics and status quo. So I often refer to a millennial as a computer. You get out of one what you put into it. So, for example, if you ask my dad about a computer and say, "Dad, what's a computer good for?" He'll say, "It's only good for one thing. It's frustrating and confusing, and really, it's only meant to play solitaire." But if you ask anyone here under the age of 30, what's a computer good for? Well, it's a vital part of everyday life. It's how plans are made and how bills are paid. It's how schedules are kept and information is sent and received back and forth. It's all at the touch of a button, and the response time is immediate. You need to find someone that understands that and is willing not to judge, but to put that time in to that millennial to get the best possible product. And when it comes to being open, it's important for all generations to realize that society is changing. Society as a whole is adapting. An example of this is to think about the emoji. Now, I was told that the emoji existed when I was a kid in the 90s. But if you would have asked me what an emoji was, I would have said it was some sort of exotic animal that jumped around. I would have no idea. But now we all know that the emoji is those little small yellow circles that show up on our phones and in our emails. As a matter of fact, to show you how society is adapting, 2015 Oxford Dictionary's word of the year was the tears of joy emoji. The first time ever that a pictograph has ever been put in the dictionary. You know, it's along this time when I'm telling managers that they have to change and they have to adapt to engage their employees, they start to get really frustrated with me. And they say things like, why should I have to change? I'm the boss. Why don't they change to fit my needs? That makes more sense. And maybe you guys are thinking the exact same thing. But the fact of the matter is that the millennials are holding all the cards. They're not bound by the same responsibilities. Unlike the boomer who got out of high school and college, got married, had a kid, bought a house. Unlike the Gen X, who's half the size of the boomer and had to adapt to the boomer's workplace culture because many companies could have survived without them. The millennial generation is not bound by your rules. There's no shame in their circle of friends for getting out of college and moving back home with mom and dad. It's often quite common, and it's almost odd if you don't do that. They're not getting married until late 20s, early 30s, and the thoughts of kids aren't even close. And they're the biggest generation to date, and odds are companies can't survive without having them in their workplace. So it's important that we change our mindset and realize that you can either judge millennials or you can embrace them. But either way, they're here. And they can make your life and your job as easy or as difficult as you allow them. So changing those perceptions. Lazy? No, not lazy. But a generation of people who thinks differently about the way work should be done and wants to find a more streamlined and efficient way of doing it. Narcissistic? No, not narcissistic, but someone who values a good first impression and understands that that first impression could live online forever. Uncommitted? No, not uncommitted, but an employee that's desperately trying to find something that engages them enough that they can really sink their teeth into it. Entitled? No, not entitled, but a group of employees who are excitable and passionate and are ready to, and will only know the limitations that you put on them. And then needy? No, not needy, but again, a generation of people who are a blank slate and can be molded and bent into anything that you need them to be. Thank you so much.